Hello, everybody. I'm Susan Clinton. I'm here with my co-hosts, Carolyn Van Dicken and Joletta Belton, the Genius Project. And we are here with Project 7, which is, do you silence your patient's distress? And our resident expert for this project is Dr. Bronnie Thompson from New Zealand. So we're so excited you're here with us, Bronnie. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure to be back with friends.
Yes.
So cool. And this is such a neat project. I really love it. The extended conversation. So we can really delve into things and think about them and work out what we're going to do. I love that.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's been a lot of fun. And so this second piece is really going to be about just getting Bronnie's observations on the conversation that Joletta and Susan and I had a couple weeks ago on this topic. And so Bronnie's had a chance to take a listen to our conversation. And I know certainly Bronnie, from my perspective, is probably the person from my perspective, at least, that has been delving into this topic clinically for as long or longer than anybody I know personally. And I have learned a ton from her website and from her regular blog. She continues to do that, which is brilliant. And I have learned more about distress questionnaires and how to utilize them or how to think about them in clinical practice. So again, Bronnie, we're thrilled to have you. Love to hear your comments or thoughts around this topic and some of the discussion that we had last time.
Yeah, really interesting topic and really, really important, because I think people still think, I actually wrote down some hidden assumptions that I think clinicians still have when we're thinking about listening to people, when we're thinking about pain as a whole person experience. I still think there's these assumptions, and so I'll read from them. So I thought one of the things that I still think plagues anybody working with people who are experiencing pain is that there's an assumption that pain is something we can change directly. You know, if I prod this, if I take this, if I manipulate that, if I change this, if I give somebody, pain's going to happen and I'm directly dealing with that problem. And we know that it's not at all like that, because pain's an experience. So just like we can't directly intervene when somebody says, I'm hungry. Yes, we can give them a snack, but what's hunger about? It's about a whole lot of stuff, including I'm bored and I'm stressed and I really fancy a sweet thing, but I've only got carrots, and you know.
Yeah.
And so we have this assumption that we understand what pain is and that we do something about it, and then we've solved the problem. And that's my second assumption, is that I think we still assume that when somebody comes to see us, that pain's the problem. When we know that people come to see us because the meaning of pain to them means it's going to impact on their sense of self and what they want to be able to do. So what they think this pain is. And when I say they, I mean me. You know, I keep talking. I have a shoulder problem. Well, I've got fibro as well, but this is a new thing. I've got a shoulder problem and I've got a groin problem. And the reason I asked for help is because I was going to do a 3-day hike.
or tramp. That's great.
with a backpack
Nice.
over the Port Hills. Now, it's beautiful. It's a 3-day tramp. They take your big pack and you just have your day pack. But it is vertical, up and down, and it's around and around and around, and then up and down. So it's quite a thing. And I started to sort of get this groin discomfort and thinking, I should do something about that. I wonder why that's going on. And then I didn't really do anything until I thought, hold on, it's about 6 weeks and I'm going to go and do this tramp. Now I had better do something. So the pain had not changed. I still don't know what it is, but I only looked for help when it started to think, I wonder if it's going to get in the way of something important to me. And I think sometimes we still assume that if a person comes to see us, that they want the pain gone, rather than answer any questions about what it might mean, the implications. And I think that's the thing that we still need to work hard on, recognising that the progress from recognizing something's wrong to seeking some help to actually meeting a therapist. That's a process that is full of all sorts of meaning for the person. So when we just think, oh, it's the pain, rate your pain out of 0 to 10, you know, we probably deserve to be slapped.
Right.
I also think that we assume that if the pain vanishes, then that person will just go back to normal. That whole event vanishes. And I guess, you know, think of childbirth. And yes, you still actually do remember. You don't remember what it feels like, but you remember that you have had a child that it hurt, and you know that, and you can never remove that. And it's the same with every pain, that every pain experience is going to leave a memory of what it was like, what went through your mind, the reception that you got from the clinician, and how that impacted on your future. And so if a clinician just thinks, well, I'll just put a magic wand to you and your pain goes and your life will go back to normal, actually it can't. It's like, it just can't. It just doesn't, because it will always influence you. And that's whether it's an acute pain or it's a chronic pain. You know, even if you sprain your ankle, you're going to think about that, at least for a time. I shouldn't wear those high heels when I walk over uneven ground. Probably still will, but you know, you do start to change how you approach life. And that's because pain is also a learning opportunity, learning experience. We struggle with the assumption that pain isn't psychological, but all pain is psychological. It's an experience. Right. And yes, it's underpinned by a whole lot of neurobiology, but it's always psychological. And I think that's probably the thing that we find hardest to swallow if we've been inducted into the biomedical model, where we think that pain is a response to tissue damage, and we still haven't quite got that around our heads around the fact that it is still an experience. So I think that can lead us to think that if somebody's talking about their distress or their beliefs or whatever, then that means they've got psychopathology. They're ill. But everybody, pain is psychological, and everybody's got thoughts and beliefs and predictions and emotions about having pain. So, and that can, I think, help to reduce some of the distress and concerns that physios in particular have about stepping out of scope. We start to remember this is not about treating depression. This is somebody who's worried and feeling a bit down and grotty, which is normal. You know, I'm the same. And I keep thinking that horrible term catastrophizing, that everybody catastrophized over the beginning of COVID. Everybody.
Absolutely.
And that was perfectly reasonable because it helps us plan for the future. And we're not all nuts. We might feel like we're going nuts from time to time. That would be normal too. But that it's actually a normal coping response when it's used, when it's got a functional element to it. It's just when it hangs around for too long and it gets in the way, then we've got to have a problem. And I think the reason that assumption kind of hangs around and why it's important is that one of the limits to any clinician really starting to explore what does it mean to you, fears that they're going to open up Pandora's box and out's going to pop this nasty genie and I won't know how to put it back in. I'll have done irrevocable damage. You can do irrevocable damage just by not asking how you're feeling. You know, that's the contrast. Right. We are not machines, we're people. And then the last assumption I really picked up on is that if we identify something, then we think we've got to do something about it personally. And we don't. We've got an extended network of people that specialise in some of this stuff. And if that's not our forte, we don't need to necessarily address it. What we all have to be really good at, though, is being aware of the need to assess that area, to look at those beliefs and meanings and emotions, so that we can then make sure that is factored into what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we're doing people a real disservice.
Mm-hmm.
End of rant.
I think that's a brilliant summary of the assumptions that are made, in clinical practice. And, one of the observations that I have had over the last maybe 5 or 10 years is I wonder what it might be like to have this blended role of PT and OT. Right. So before, I've been practicing for 33 years. I think about someone like Debbie Patterson, who's been practicing for 40, and she's a POT, right? So we called them a combined PTOT, and that was a thing. And then we separate a POT. So she's a POT. and then we separated into 2 distinct, professions, where I really think the skill sets probably, we need to go back to being POTs. What do you think about that?
I've been preaching this one for a long time. When I look at a good physio, a good OT, a good psychologist, a good social worker, a good body worker, good massage therapist, we do pretty much identical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not you're taking my role. It's saying, hey, as a group, we have more in common than we have that's different.
Right.
And isn't that a strength? And I don't think it leads to over-servicing, and I don't think it needs to lead to turf wars. I think it's just saying, as a group of clinicians who care deeply about helping people who have pain, we are going to work in the same space because the same information applies to us all. Our end result is the same. We want someone to go away feeling healthy, feeling that they're living their life, not my life, and that they are resilient. That's what I'm looking for. I can live my own life and I can be resilient. And there are lots of different ways we can get there, and all of our professions can fit together to make that happen. And I guess that the IASP has this notion that it is an interprofessional approach that's needed. And that stemmed from way back when it was just a medical model.
Right.
And we had medical disciplines, and the anaesthetist was saying, well, I need to talk to the neurologist, and the neurologist said, well, I probably need to talk to the rheumatologist. And then, actually Fordyce, grandfather of pain psychology, used OTs and physios in his first behavioural approach to managing persistent pain. And our jobs then were to get people doing things, and to reinforce well behaviour and to not reinforce illness behaviour.
Right.
And that was, nothing much has really changed. We're still doing that. We just use a few more words.
Right.
And we've probably got a bit more complicated about it.
Yeah,
It's always helpful.
That complication, I think, is part of the barrier to, and that it does become like a turf war, rather than looking at those commonalities and discovering what are the things that are done in all of these professions that you listed, Bronnie, that are helping people to live better and to live their lives and become more resilient, and focusing on those things and pulling those things out and doing more research in those areas and developing more programs around those commonalities rather than siloing off. Like, we need more
much healthier, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I get the students in our postgrad program to look at what they do. So they each assess, we give them a case study, and they each do their own formulation. And then we get them to meet somebody from a different profession who's done the same assignment. We say, okay, what did you do the same? What did you do differently? And what could you pick up from each other? Because that's what we need to do in daily practice, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
I was going to say something.
I wonder when it comes to sort of cost and cost efficiency, because pain is such a prevalent problem, that one of the benefits of taking a broader perspective and a whole person perspective is that in the end, we'll actually not duplicate services, we'll reduce costs, because one person can deal with much of the sort of biopsychosocial components. And then, of course, there's a ceiling on all of those things where you say, nope, that's beyond my scope, my skill, my training. And that might be true in the bio world, even as a physio, where I say, hey, you know what? I don't have, let's say an orthopedic therapist says, oh, this really looks like a pelvic health problem. I should refer to a pelvic health clinician who has expertise in that area, right? Or vice versa with spinal sort of expertise. So it's not that we don't recognize our limits to our training, but that we also from the get-go should be much more broadly trained.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it's starting to occur a little bit here where we're just reviewing our medical curriculum, so the undergrad medical training. Physiotherapy has already revised theirs, and the new program has got the IASP interprofessional and physiotherapy competencies built into it for pain.
Nice.
Which is fantastic.
That's amazing.
And you kind of think, let's build that through all of our learning so that we've all got this common understanding. And then we're not sort of saying, well, that's my stuff, don't touch it.
Right.
How dare you touch it? Because when we're looking at pain, it's a whole experience. It's not just one bit or another.
Yeah.
But that sense of where's the dividing line, I think it's going to differ depending on your maturity. I've learned a whole lot since I graduated in 1984.
Yeah.
You know, it's a long time ago. And if I thought I had to stick with what I'd learned then, and that was the limit of what I knew about, I'd be very scared. And instead I've gone and explored a whole lot of other areas, and I think most mature therapists do. And that means that our contribution to a team becomes much broader. And that's why I like to look at, I don't use the word role, I talk about my contribution as a team member, because ultimately when we're working with a person, they're going to resonate with one or more people in a team.
Right.
And it's going to be more effective for them if they can meet somebody who they get on really well with, even if that person doesn't look like they're the one that should have the specialist expertise.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, in pain management, in our tertiary service here that is an interprofessional team, we often find that the patients don't really want to talk to the doctor about the medications. They'd rather talk to the physio or the OT. They don't want to talk to the physio about the exercises that they don't do. They'd rather talk to the psychologist about why they don't do them.
Right. Yeah.
That's really a strength, because if we're able to comfortably converse in those areas, we get the chance to reinforce the messages that other team members have had, and then build that sense that we're on the same team. We're not in our own little corner fighting for our turf. And I think that's even in a place where, say, you only have two, like a primary care physician and one other clinician, you've still got some overlap. You should still have some common ideas about what's happening in pain, so you can reinforce one another. Yep. And that alleviates any single profession from bearing all the responsibility for what goes on. As Jo says, you know, people spend more time by themselves running their own lives than they ever spend with any one of us. And it's got to embed in the person's own life, or it won't happen. We talk about compliance and adherence, and keep wondering, well, why? I'm like that. It's not. You know, if we started by listening to this person's own lifestyle, and we thought about what resonates with them to achieve where they want to get to, we could build some stuff in that fits into that person's life. For example, don't get me to the gym. Everybody knows about my aversion to the gym. You know, so don't do something else that I do enjoy, because I'll do it. And it's the same with psychology, and the same with OT, and same with medicine. Let's look at building stuff into that person's own lifestyle. So I like that idea of a menu of options. Here's a like motivational interviewing. Here's a whole bunch of things that you might want to talk about your pain. Which one do you want to start with? So you can start with, say, medication taking or diet, or you might start with adequate rest and refreshment. You might start with movement. Whatever place you start, you'll end up visiting them all anyway, because that's part of living well.
Mhm.
But you
Right.
start with you do easy wins first.
Yeah.
Susan's very quiet.
Susan, do you have-
I'm just taking a lot of this in.
Mhm.
I was jotting down these 6 assumptions that you were talking about, and the one thing that kind of just struck me here is that when you said that, is it the memory? Does pain leave a memory of the experience, or does the experience leave a memory of the pain? And I was just kind of thinking about that because I know that my own personal, work with my clients has been, away from the word, they tend to, I talk about experience, of course, and they tend to like want to kind of circle it back. And I thought the way that you kind of put that in there with that pain leaving a memory, because it is an experience rather than is it one or the other, like let's blame the experience or blame the pain. But the idea that it's just the whole thing is just an experience, and anything you experience is going to leave a memory.
Yeah. And then that's going
How
to,
important it is up to our
yeah,
brain to decide, but it will leave a memory, right?
yeah. And I guess it also depends on the relevance to what you want to do. So,
Mm-hmm.
so most of you know that I make silver jewelry, and I burned my finger and thumb on a soldering iron, which was dumb. I grabbed it. Now, for me to lose use of my fingers is super, super important. I type all day. I'm constantly rubbing and writing and doing stuff. And I love to do this silversmithing is something that's, my brain-free time where I just let things go.
Yeah.
And so the representation of that means that when I start thinking about working in my silversmith studio, I'm going to take better care not to pick it up by the wrong end.
Right.
That's a useful place for pain to operate. It's the function of pain. It's not perhaps pain as function in terms of how evolution does it, but it's in this context of what I do in my life. This is what I'm learning, how I'm using that experience. Now, it could be negative. For example, if I did that big tramp around the Port Hills and I really did hurt my knee, lateral knee pain. Yeah, so good, because I was going downhill a lot. And it could be unhelpful in that I might anticipate, because I remember what it was like and how I could hardly move, I might think, well, I'm going to do that again and I will never do that again. I'll never go walking again. But if we can help somebody recognise that that memory is a really useful way of saying, hey, I wonder if I could change how I went about it. What can I learn from it, rather than a black and white do or don't do.
Right.
If we treat pain as a learning experience, even persistent pain, it's a really nice way of helping us get the utility out of this experience. How can we use it for good?
Right.
Even with persistent pain, if your pain fluctuates, I'm thinking to myself, why is my pain fluctuating? Oh, that's right, COVID. I've been sitting at home on the computer. I haven't had a decent holiday. I've had a lot of extra work, probably not doing quite as much of my movement. These are all little things that are probably adding up to why I'm having a bit of a flare-up at the moment. So I can change those things. Then I've got some tools to use. And it's not psychopathologizing. It's just saying, hey, there's a whole bunch of things that contribute to why my pain does what it does, how it does what it does.
I think that speaks to what you were talking about earlier too, when you're talking about the assumptions and how much is tied to meaning and the meaning that we make of those experiences, and then that meaning, is tied into what we expect is going to happen, and whether we think negative things are going to happen or positive things are going to happen, or that it's unchangeable, or that there are things that we can do. And I think that one of the greatest things that clinicians can do is to help someone come to meanings that make sense for them in their life, that are therapeutic and more beneficial, and allow them to do more things that make them feel like themselves, and make them feel productive and worthy, and all of those things. And so often, though, if patients aren't heard or listened to, those meanings are never how they're making sense of their experience is never uncovered. And so then there's never a possibility of changing how they're making sense of what's happening.
Yeah. I think of one of the guys that I was referred just before lockdown. He had testicular cancer, and he had been treated. It was successful. It was great. And then he developed a back pain, and he immediately thought, "This is we uncovered this later. It's back. That's the beginning of the end." And I was thinking that, you know, if the clinician hadn't asked, "What do you think is going on?" and had just treated the back pain, there would have been nothing uncovered of his fears, because yes, the pain was bothersome, but it wasn't the pain intensity. It was, this is the beginning of my life, and where else has it gone? And really the issue for that man was around his understanding of his cancer, not about his pain. Because when he understood a lot more about his cancer, he realized that he was actually a lot safer than he had thought he was. So that's a whole weight off his mind. And if we don't ask, what sense are you making? What's your theory about why your pain's doing what it does? We never get that out. And that's we're so keen to explain pain. It's all about the it isn't just about the neurobiology. And we can add neurobiology in as we need, as it's useful, not as a curriculum or a prescription. Thou shalt receive the truth from on high. No, because, you know, I could have talked to this guy about his nociplastic pain and perhaps a bit of inflammatory pain. That would have made not a jot of difference. To him, it meant I might have my cancer. Until we had that scan that you wouldn't normally do for back pain, he wasn't really comfortable thinking about that it's okay.
And I think that's such an important point, because that uncovered the distress that he might not have brought to the fore without having been, you know, guided in that direction or asked those questions. And then that would compound the distress if it's never addressed. And he's just left to live with the fear and the worry, and then it just compounds on itself. And I think that's so I know one of the things you talked about was the measurement of all of this stuff and which questionnaires are useful. And to be honest, questionnaires are a bit of a mixed blessing. They're really useful for uncovering some of the yellow flags and for understanding and actually asking a person without directly asking them, what do you think? But they're a useless piece of paper or electronics if you don't go through the items and actually look at what is this person really telling me? Because it's really, questionnaires are a nice convenient way of organising some stuff and finding out, what does this person think? So you can just ask them. If you want to compare that person with other people and see how different or the same they are, and maybe derive some assumptions about what you might want to prioritise, kind of, then use the scoring. And perhaps if you want to see if you've made a difference, but actually I tend to use them very lightly because I use them, but because they're a broad brush. Really want to understand, what does this person think I've asked this about? Why am I asking these questions? When I use the pain anxiety symptom scale, or I use the depression anxiety stress scales, I want to understand what do they think these items meant. Pain catastrophizing scale is exactly the same. What do they think we're getting at here? So what are they communicating through the scores? Because the scores themselves are nothing. It's what are they, how are we using them, how are we interpreting them, and what does this person think we're trying to find out? Because they'll put their own level of meaning on it. I'm a bit concerned that there is a temptation to give everybody a questionnaire and then say, oh, you've got low levels of distress on the DAS and you've got high levels of catastrophizing on the magnifying scale, therefore we will do X. And it's nothing. That's losing the individual and what matters to them. That's what's driving their responding
And that's why we need to talk about, what do you mean by,
Mm.
you said that it was really high, that you can't get it out of your mind. When does that happen? What goes through your mind at that time? How can we help you learn to deal with that in an effective way? And that's not psychology, really. That's being a person.
Right.
How can I help you?
Yeah. I wonder if the questionnaires for physios at least give us a framework again, or a jumping off point to start having these discussions, right? Whereas it's hard to necessarily get a good understanding of where the patient's coming from when that is not our training, right? So I think for me, that's where, so I will get the patients to fill out the questionnaires, and then when they bring them in, first of all, two things happen. One is they know we're going to have a discussion about a sensory and emotional experience, right? Because they've been kind of primed for that.
Yeah.
And then the second piece is we put them down and we say, you know what, we're going to go through this and talk about what this means and what your interpretation of this. But I just want to hear your story. Can you just tell me your story in your words? Because that is just a piece of information that again brings some guidance to the process, but it is not the be all and end all. Right?
Yeah, it's like we can, I've seen it happen here, we can put more weight on the questionnaires because it comes out with a number, and we do on the person's story and what they're telling us. And actually they need to be weighted equally, along with our observations and our clinical testing. All of that material just gives us a rounder picture, a more holistic picture of that person. So yeah, the questionnaires offer a framework. They're an organising structure. For here's some theory about how we think, say, catastrophizing works. Here's some structures. So let's sort of organise that information for you and use it. It's just when it starts to become truth with capital T that I think we've got to start questioning it. And I think too, it is. I have heard a story of a physio who was observed saying to a person, do you have any psychological issues? And the patient apparently said, no, that's a really weird question. And she said, yeah, I know that's a really weird question. So you don't, you're not depressed. Now, this was an MSK PT who hadn't done any pain stuff. And when she was thinking about what does psychosocial mean, that's her interpretation. So it's a kind of a blunt instrument. And that speaks to me, one of perhaps not really understanding it, but two of her own discomfort with asking questions about something that she may also feel vulnerable about. And so part of this learning to deal with this is actually growing ourselves, feeling that actually we are the same as the people that we work with. Yes, we've got lots of expertise and we've listened to lots of stories, but we have probably not been through the same experiences as that person in front of us. And so they're the experts in their own experience in life. And our job is to listen and absorb that and then reflect that against all the stuff that we know. Then they choose, because we're just a consultant, they choose the bits that they feel are useful and fit for them. I think that really struck home for me when I looked at my during my PhD at people who are coping well. People that live long term with pain don't stop looking for stuff that might help. It's just that they look at it differently. They say, hey, is that going to be worth it for me? Is it worth it? Because if that doesn't fit in my life, I'm not going to do that. If I have to give up X, Y, and Z and I value those things, then I'm not going to do that either. And I might take that bit and just change it to fit with what I want to do. And sometimes as clinicians, we can feel a bit offended. But actually, that's what people do. That's how people live. We tweak stuff. Even people who do a paleo diet will refine and tweak it to fit for their preferences and tastes.
Like beer?
Yeah. Absolutely. So we've got to remember that sense of we bring expertise, but so does the person. Neither of us is one up. We're actually it should be a meeting.
A team. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the same level.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, again, that's not how we're trained, really, right? We're trained with this expertise, and the more expertise we gain through specialization, through whatever, that doesn't necessarily translate into that kind of team approach, because now I'm special. I know all kinds of special stuff, right? And I can tell you what you need to do.
And you have to study very hard in your training. And there's lots of black and white. You get this right and you get that wrong. And that, I think, also trains clinicians to think in black and white terms, that I've done the right thing or I've done the wrong thing. When, if we look at it in a more contextual way, in some circumstances, something that you did that was really useful, but if you tried to do the same thing in another, it wouldn't be so good.
Right.
But think about rest.
Right.
We say rest for coping is a really bad thing for people with persistent pain, but it's actually really useful in an acute pain setting. It's just that we don't help people work out when to stop using that as their primary strategy. Right. And it's about when and how you use those approaches. And it's a bit like that with us. I don't think there's anything wrong with hands-on therapy. I think it's got a really valuable place if it's used judiciously and in the service of what this person wants and needs.
Right.
Not because I'm an expert.
Right.
And I've got magic
I'm going to fix something.
My magic hands.
Yeah. And so I think for, again, that manual piece, it's often our language around it, right? It's the context we put it in that can be really helpful, or it can be really harmful for our patient, right? Interaction.
And I think that depends on the lens. Like the more specialized you become, the lens you look through tends to get smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
Which is okay as long as you remember to step back and see that whole person and look through that broader lens as well. But sometimes the language that can be harmful is through that very narrow lens that's not looking at the person.
Getting that the person with pain has a very broad lens on their own life. They don't have this narrow focus on the little tiny piece that you've taken years to develop.
Right.
I think that translation part is a really important thing. Knowledge translation really is what I think OTs and PTs are doing. Saying, hey, we've got all this knowledge. We need to translate it into how does this fit for you? How can what I know help you do what's important?
All right. Well, wow, what a discussion. And just so much knowledge and wisdom, Bronnie. Thank you for that. We're going to meet again in a couple of weeks. I think the date is November 5th. Do I have that right? We should have looked at that before maybe we started, but does anybody have it in front of them?
I will have it here in just a second.
All right. Bronnie, any parting words of thoughts or even just an invitation around a different way to maybe reframe that reductionistic tendency that we all have, I think, as clinicians, right? We all still have it. Even though I say, I take a whole person approach, right? I still can get caught in reductionism. And so it's our tendency, it's our training.
I think that need to be certain is what drives that tendency to simplify, because we want to know. And when we're looking at somebody else's life, it's a whole field of ambiguity. And I think that for us, learning to be okay with ambiguity and uncertainty is our biggest learning curve. It's the biggest thing that we need to learn, because this person that we're working with is also in that same position of uncertainty and ambiguity. So just like when we started to learn something new and it felt a bit scary, imagine that person who's coming to see you feeling that's their life right now. It's really uncertain. I don't know what's happening. I don't know how to take control. And so that person's also going to simplify and try and make things easier to understand. So let's not overcomplicate things. Let's not use big words if we don't have to.
Yeah.
I talk about freaking out, not catastrophizing. Freaking out. You're a bit worried about this. That's okay. You're feeling a bit down, not depressed. Let's look at that. You're moving a bit funny. You're looking a bit sort of awkward when you do that movement. There's a better way than say, you've got dysfunction and you no. whatever.
Your tilt, your dysfunctional, those things.
Yeah.
I'm going to get a t-shirt that says, I'm a field of ambiguity.
I
like
it.
Love it.
Yeah, join the confuser cat paradigm.
And I'm going to get one that says I'm an ambiguity expert.
Ooh, I like that.
What is that, right?
That is what we're dealing with. It's
Yeah.
not straightforward. And to feel comfortable, I think we need to come back to what is in the here and now. And so I'm drawing a lot from acceptance and commitment therapy here and ACT, and saying what the only things that are in the here and now are my sensations, my body sensations. What am I noticing? So when I'm sitting with somebody and I'm listening, I want to feel my weight on my butt. I want to feel my feet on the floor. I want to notice that I'm leaning forward. I want to notice that I'm hearing. Almost as if you lose track of time because you're listening. And to me, if we can do that, then we're fully present. That might be the simplest way for us to begin to work in this space.
Brilliant.
I love
So
that.
be present and yeah. Often I think when we listen to a conversation, we're already thinking about what our response is and what the interpretation of that is. And you can't be present and do that at the same time, can you? No.
Our brains aren't wired like that. So it's sort of sitting, listening, being, and then taking some time to process before responding. And that's okay. It slows our conversations down.
Yeah.
But it also means that person feels heard.
Right.
And isn't that the most important thing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, we are going to welcome Bronnie back again in a couple of weeks to have an open mic discussion. What's the date, Susan?
November 5th,
Okay.
8 o'clock Eastern time.
Excellent.
It'll be 6 o'clock Mountain time, 5 o'clock Pacific time, and I have no idea what time it will be in New Zealand.
I want to say it's going to be 4 p.m. the next day.
Yes.
So she's going to be ahead of us. She's always ahead of us. She's ahead of our time.
It's always tomorrow.
Right? Yeah, it's always tomorrow in Bronnie's
Bronnie
world.
lives in the future.
Yes, she does. She does. So
if it's 25 past 11 on the 14th today.
On the 14th, and we're on the 13th. Yeah.
We're on the 13th. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Oh, look at that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with us. And we look forward to doing this again in a couple weeks.
It's going to be cool.
Thank you, Bronnie.
Thank you. Bye.